Hello everybody and welcome back, and welcome to this new series here on the channel, Pick of the Week. This will be a weekly installment on the channel where I'll be looking at the past week of hockey, both NHL and to a certain extent international hockey, and discussing things that caught my eye. It can be trades, suspensions, signings, talking about certain players or special occasions. So let's get right into it and start off the first episode. And I have to start off with the biggest and most beautiful thing from last week, the Sedins jersey retirement in Vancouver. What a ceremony. I recommend you watch the full thing on YouTube. It's almost an hour, but it's definitely worth it. It's full of nice speeches and some funny jokes and just an overall beautiful evening. And I wish I could have been there to see it myself, because what the Sedins have done in their career is just remarkable. The way they played together, the chemistry they had, both as Canucks and on an international stage for Sweden, it was just sensational. And even though they weren't the fastest skaters, they used their intelligence and skill to stay at the top of their game, even towards the end of their career. And I will never forget that last home game they had, when Daniel Sedin scored the winning goal in overtime, assisted by, of course, his brother Henrik, as always. And there's so many examples of them just being unstoppable. The cycles they had in the offensive zone, the passing, just everything. And that final goal at home was just a brilliant way to top off their careers. And the ceremony to celebrate the careers was just so emotional and beautiful, and you could really see how much the city of Vancouver loves the Sedins. And I can only congratulate them on having such terrific careers, and I wish them well for the future. Moving on from that beautiful and touching moment, it's been a busy week for the Department of Player Safety. I've ranted about them before, and it seems like I'm not alone with my frustration. On Saturday, Evander Kane put up this statement, venting his frustration and going quite hard on George Peros. Now if you missed it, Evander Kane was suspended 3 games after elbowing Neil Pionk, and it doesn't seem like Kane thought his suspension was unwarranted, and I think he deserves a suspension for what he did. It was really unnecessary and an ugly elbow to the head, but I totally agree with his point that the Department of Player Safety is incredibly inconsistent. Before he tweeted his statement, Kane tweeted 2 examples of incidents that didn't lead to suspensions, and for me, they're definitely suspendable, especially the Chara cross-check to the face of Gallagher. Now you would think this would lead to suspension. It's a dirty play, but no. A $5,000 fine was enough apparently. And there's so many examples of plays that should lead to suspensions, but like a lot of people are finding out, the Department of Player Safety is so inconsistent, and I agree with Evander Kane when he says we need a third party that makes the decisions on the suspensions. And also, make the suspensions longer. We had Zach Kassian getting 7 games for kicking a guy with your skate. It's an absolute joke, and it should be much more than 7 games. It's ridiculous. And we also have some injury news and some big players at that. Connor McDavid will be out for 2 to 3 weeks with a quad injury, which is obviously a huge loss for the Oilers, and Leon Draisaitl will have to do some carrying, but in the games the Oilers have been without McDavid. Draisaitl has looked really good, and that doesn't really surprise me because Draisaitl on his own is a very good player, and a lot of people seem to think that Draisaitl's success is tied to McDavid. But Draisaitl on his own is, like I said, a really good player, and he doesn't really need McDavid. Obviously Draisaitl playing with McDavid makes him a better player, but he's a top elite player on his own. The Canadiens also had a big player go out with an injury. Shea Weber will be out for 4 to 6 weeks with an ankle sprain, and this doesn't make the Habs playoffs chase any easier. For me, Weber is their best defenseman, and while he isn't the fastest or most agile skater, he is still so solid, and he's got that bomb on the blue line, and losing such a key player isn't good. And honestly, I think the Habs should just start listening to calls for Tatar and Kovalchuk and maybe someone else, and just write the season off, because I don't think they will make the playoffs, and might as well try and get as much as you can for Tatar and Kovalchuk, who have been really good for them this season. And they can hope to get lucky in the draft lottery and maybe even land Alexis Lafreniere, which would be insane, but we'll see. Speaking of write-offs, San Jose lost Erik Karlsson for the rest of the season with a broken thumb. I don't see them going anywhere now without Karlsson, and they just have to accept the fact that they messed this season up. And what's worse is that they don't have their first round pick this season, which belongs to Ottawa. They're an absolute mess, and they're paying the price now. And moving on to some international hockey. This happened 2 weeks ago, but I still wanted to talk about it because I wasn't able to when it actually happened. And I'm talking about the CHL. And I'm not talking about the Canadian Hockey League, I'm talking about the Champions Hockey League in Europe. And if you don't know what it is, it's basically a club competition in Europe. Unfortunately, with no KHL teams, maybe in the future, we'll see. With 32 teams from 13 European leagues, where there's a group stage which leads to the playoffs, where teams play a 2-game series against each other, 1 at home and 1 away, where the winner on aggregate moves on until we reach the final, which is just one winner-takes-all classic final. And I just wanted to highlight this competition because I think it's a great concept. It grows the game in Europe and also gives the fans the opportunity to see some teams from other countries and see some great players as well. And this year, we have some really good prospects ahead of the 2020 draft on display in the tournament. Team Stützle, Lucas Raymond and Alexander Holtz were some of the players that played in the tournament. And what I mean is that if you're, let's say, German, it'll be hard for you to watch Lucas Raymond, for example, because he plays in Sweden. But with the CHL, he can end up playing a game in Germany in the group stage or the playoffs, giving you the chance to watch him. And it's also a great way for teams to see how they match up against each other. How good is the Czech League champion against the Finnish League champion? The CHL could give you the answer. And while there are some great players and teams playing, my favorite aspect of the tournament is the fans. It's so different from the NHL. The arenas are smaller, but it's so loud, and you can see how much this really means for the fans and the players, and I just love that. Unfortunately, the tournament for this season is over. Frölunda from Sweden won their 4th CHL title against Mountfield from the Czech Republic, and I recommend you watch the highlights from the final. It was a really good game, and the fans were on top of their game as well. Even when the game was over, the fans were still going at it, the Mountfield fans were still going at it, and it was just an overall great atmosphere. And I also recommend you watch some of the CHL next year. The group stage can be a bit dead and boring, but when it gets to the playoffs, it gets really good and you will enjoy it. So that's it for the first episode of Pick of the Week. I want to make this a weekly series and have a lot of plans for it, so I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please leave a like on it, and thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.